Hello guys, and thank you for joining me today. Like last time, this is going to be the second video. This is going to be the final project. So I made a video a few weeks ago in regards to, I think it's last month, in regards to technical challenges for nuclear power in space. This is going to be more of the regulatory and safety challenges for that exact problem and issue. So we're going to be discussing more in align with laws and the safety concerns with space. So it's more like law and regulations that would be kind of and the challenges that is within that. Thank you for joining me today. This is going to be about space, and this little disclaimer: this is a final project from my class in Oregon State University. This is a one-credit class that I'm taking, and what I'm doing is a master's degree in nuclear health physics or radiation health physics. If you guys don't know what that is, don't feel bad. I didn't know what it is until I came into this school. It's actually just a master's in nuclear physics with kind of a more concentration into healthcare and radiation protection than what a mechanical or a nuclear engineer would tend to do. So we'll get into it, and this is a part two to the last video. And a little disclaimer, I'm making this video and I'm going to be posting it on YouTube because it's easier to share this video to my professor, but I'm also going to post it to the YouTube channel so that the audience could also find and learn about this, and if it get them interested, then that's a win for me. So I'm going to be talking to the audience of people on YouTube as my target audience, but this is also a final project for my professor to actually look at, but just so you can kind of understand who I'm actually talking to. So it would be the target audience of YouTube, of people who would be interested in something like this. So let's get into it. So just like last time, as humanity goes deeper into space, the needs for long-term energy source become very essential, and sustaining mission beyond Earth, nuclear power present like a very good solution, offering consistent, efficient energy source, propulsion, habitat, and whatever in different kind of space. Also, like we talked about a lot of this of why nuclear power would be good in the technical solution. Now we're talking about more regulatory. So right now there's a lot of regulatory, especially for the global, especially in space, that's just not really there. And this presentation is gonna really look into it and the radiation risk. Also, another disclaimer is that I realized that last video took over 40 minutes because I had a lot of slides. It's like 17 slides. So this presentation, I think I'm gonna kind of learn from it and just kind of condense it and just make it very, very short. So I think I only have 7 slides, so it doesn't take like an hour to make this presentation. And so we're gonna go to this just so that the audience can be a little bit more engaging. And this is only a one-credit class. We don't need to go into so much of a detail. I'll be as detailed as possible, but we're not going to go into like very small nitty gritty like last video and make the videos just too long, and people are not going to be interested in it. So let's go into the first problem, which is the lack of international frameworks. As this is a conversation to the professor, like these are kind of the bullet point that the professor have given as a suggestion. I see nothing wrong with it, so I'm gonna choose to go with it because it seems like it's a very good topic to talk about, right? So current regulations right now is the Outer Space Treaty. It prohibits nuclear weapons in space, but it doesn't really fully address nuclear power use. It also, like, there's a lot of laws similar to this as well that prevents, or international laws that prevent use of nuclear testing, like nuclear weapon testing in space, in the sea, and on land. So most nuclear testing are usually done underground, where it wouldn't do as much damage, right? And just usually really deep down. So that's what's going on today. And another law is a UN principle relevant to nuclear power source in outer spaces in 1992. Is provide guidelines to nuclear in space, so like it's so like it makes you if you're gonna launch anything that has nuclear in space, you're gonna need to be very mindful. Like, what if there's failure or um, anything that might cause it to explode in space and kind of rain down to Earth? From what I understand, the problem with these type of international regulatory is that it is based on honor system, and there's really nothing that can really hold a country accountable. So let's say like us in the United States, we will honor it, but let's say if Russia has a space race with us and they want, or China, there's nothing we really can do other than like maybe like a small tariff or something that, and even then that's even like stretching it to kind of enforce this type of regulations in space. And that's just kind of the biggest gap right now that we have for space. So let's go into more of the gaps that we have currently. So space, as us as humans, as society, we're still very relatively new when it comes to space and space travel. A lot of you guys probably still have grandparents who just experienced space travel for first time in their life. So like the Sputnik, right? So a lot of people might have grandparents that are still alive who are from that era, right? That of Sputnik and all those things. So we're very new when it comes to society with space travel. And it's hard to believe, right? But we're still very relatively new come to this. So there's not a lot of law and regulations in place for it, and it's really hard to kind of fight over it based on the countries. And when you go to different countries, they have different safety protocol, where maybe France, Switzerland, and all these different countries, United States, they all have their own specific type of regulatory body that kind of regulates it, and they tend to kind of maybe take advice from the international body, but those are just mainly just advice. You don't really have to take it, right? But it's some country might take it more seriously than others, and during when it comes to maybe like the Cold War or where different kind of powers wants to show themselves above the others, those type of regulation kind of goes out the window. So so there's a need for international governing body to oversee nuclear space activities, but that goes into many challenges of like who would do it, how would it be regulated, and how would they even enforce it when a country doesn't want to do it. So you wouldn't want to, let's say if Russia or China or even the United States don't want to do it, how do we punish them, right? Do we go to war and risk a lot of lives to kind of enforce this? Do we do tariffs and economic sanctions, which might not kind of yield fruit as you may think, or it may go into a tariff war or economic battle. There's a lot of very complexity when it comes to this. It's easy to regulate things within the same government, so like the same country, but it's really hard to regulate things when it become international because everyone has their own interests. So now let's go to radiation protection for astronauts in space. So we're going to talk a little bit more about regulatory than what the effects. So because the last video we talked a lot about the radiation effects for in space, but we're going to go through it a little bit again, right? So when you're in space, there's an increased risk of cancer, neurological effect, and cardiovascular issue and long-term duration mission, like example to Mars or Saturn, or even if we go beyond that, require better shielding and exposure to limits to radiation. And the reason for that is because in space, you don't have the type of protection that you would have on Earth. So, and it depends on where you are in space too. So let's say you're in low Earth orbits where the International Space Station would be, or most of the satellites would be on Earth or in the outer space. Those are still close enough to Earth that the magnetic field prevents any type of damage from space radiations from that you would have in space. The first job, and I did talk a little bit about this, but the first master's degree that I pursued was in Johns Hopkins University for space system engineering. And the first class I took for that master's was space weathering. And that's a very interesting topic because a lot of weather in space is a lot more extreme than it is here on Earth because the Earth magnetic field does kind of prevent a lot of ionizing radiation from the sun. A lot of space weathering, most of them comes from the sun, and you don't have a lot of protection that you would have on Earth outside in space that would be very, very damaging to a human being. And a lot of things that have shielding, they are good at shielding against radiation for the compartments for technology and stuff, but they might not provide a good protection for human beings on space, especially long duration missions. There's a lot of report of astronauts coming back and they have some damage in their DNAs and whatnot. And that's still an ongoing research because we're still pretty new when it comes to radiation science and space science, that we don't have a lot of data to support it. I think the most that we have are from Chernobyl accident and from World War II, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those type of studies. But other studies are done on mice that are highly inbred, and they don't really reflect what would happen to human beings. Human beings, they all have very unique biology. So some people with certain DNA might be more susceptible than others. Even among brothers, right? Even among siblings, like they have very, very different DNAs. So yeah, it makes this research into this field, especially when it comes to radiation, very, very hard. And we run into ethical concern when we do test subjects on humans, you know. So that's a lot of things that we kind of run into when it comes to nuclear physics world and space physics worlds, right? Astrophysics. So let's go into NASA, right? So NASA has imposed like different radiation exposure limit for men and women due to cancer risk, right? So this really raised ethical concerns about discrimination among women and men, right? Because men can, from these studies, they can kind of stay in space or be exposed to radiation at a higher doses than a woman does, just because of their biology, right? So this sparked a very fierce debate in regards to that kind of career field and this type of field. But I think there's a lot of opinion. My opinion is that you cannot, a lot of things in space, and because of the danger involved, you cannot have the same type of ethical beliefs and social norm that you could have on Earth. And you know, like biologies and physics and science don't really care about ethics and political correctness. So as we go into space and where it's very dangerous, we do have to implement these type of radiation exposure limits for that's specific to gender, and you know, like it does raise ethical concerns. But I think at the end of the day, safety trumps you know, DEI and equality. I think it just has to be a very, very mindful discussion when we have these things, and we're very, very mindful that things in space are not going to be like what's on Earth, and we're going to have a different way of thinking when we do that. So potential solution for these are advanced shielding. So there's certain shielding that protect against radiation for equipment. So let's say like EMP in space for electronics, but it doesn't really protect as well for human ionizing radiation. So let's go into ionizing and unionizing radiation. Is that ionizing has the potential radiation can penetrate your body, and non-ionizing radiation can't penetrate your skin, right? It doesn't penetrate. So when you're on Earth, the vast majority of ionizing radiation is filtered out by the Earth's magnetic field. So that when we're out in the sun, you know, that's radiation. You know, light is even radiation, but those aren't non-ionizing. So you can get like kind of skin cancer or sunburn, but it's really rare that it would cause like internal cancer. But ionizing radiation can penetrate your body, and it can give you thyroid cancer or different type of cancers within your body. Or even if it doesn't lead to cancer, it can lead to other type of health problem like low blood counts and among other things, right? So we'll make this short, but that's kind of the problems with ionizing radiation. And when you leave Earth's orbit, that's what we really um, um, care about. So I'm really trying to focus on this. So, like I said, this is very young. So addictive exposure limit, they still need to have limits, new research on it. And so right now, different countries, like I said, have different kind of policies. So on um, on Earth, you have maybe like five surveys, um, and in other countries might be as low as two. So it's very no good consensus on what it is per year, what people should be exposed to. So that's kind of what is the problem with this type of regulation today, and getting people to cooperate, especially in like when they're at political power, they want to fight with each other to get kind of control over it. It becomes a very political nightmare, of this type of dance. So let's go into, I guess my picture kind of cut out some of it. So what the title says, environmental and public safety concerns, right? So we can't talk about nuclear energy and nuclear power and nuclear anything without addressing the elephant in the room, and that's public fear of nuclear. So when you talk about nuclear, people are extremely afraid of nuclear. It has a very bad stigma attached to it, where people are afraid of nuclear because of media, because of what happened during World War I and World War II. I mean, with Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and people are extremely afraid of nuclear because of a lot of like movies and stuff. One example of it is the China Syndrome, where it's a movie back in the day where it really cemented the downfall of nuclear power in the United States, even though nuclear power and nuclear weapons is not really on the same type of how we use nuclear, not even similar science, I would say. Similar but not similar, right? So when it comes to nuclear, there's a lot of fear involved. So we need to kind of address that elephant in the room and really communicate with the public. So let's go into launch failure. So when we launch things into space, there's a lot of potential failure during liftoff that could space radioactive material into the Earth atmosphere. So during the incident of Castle Bravo, and we'll go into it, it's one of the biggest failure in nuclear power tests and weapon tests in the United States history, where it was done in the Marshall Islands. And because of that Castle Bravo accident, it spread radioactive material all across the world, and you have cesium that compete with calcium. So people everywhere in the world, you have radioactive material in people's bones, no matter where they are. So it was done in the Marshall Islands. Like nowhere on Earth from that time, everyone has a little bit of radioactive material in their body from that, right? From that generation. So that's kind of the thing that is very big of a concern. Back in the day, I think the idea of nuclear dissipation is the solution to pollution is dilution, right? You just dilute it out and it would just kind of go away, and that's just not really a good type of mindset when you look at nuclear power. In certain cases, I have heard of it working, but in most cases, it just wasn't a good mindset to have in all situation, right? So when we look into like liftoff failures and explosions, you have like the figure like Elon Musk, that he would complain a lot about, like when he launched rockets into space. There's so many things that he have to account for, like what if this rocket falls and hit a whale, and what would happen, So that just seems silly, right? But this is kind of the root of it, where what happened if the rocket fails? It has nuclear and chemical in it, and what happened is it gets spread across the atmosphere and rain down, and could it contaminate crops and like food supply, and it could make people sick. So that's kind of the main concern with it, right? So there's a few case studies of it. So past launch failure, like the Soviets Cosmos, the 9954, the re-entry accident where it kind of spread certain contamination. So there's a lot of things to kind of consider when you kind of launch things into space. So space debris and nuclear contamination, right? So when the runs, even when it's out in space, what if it fall back onto Earth? So let's say you have nuclear power satellite, right? It when it goes on low Earth orbit, there's still a little bit of atmosphere up in space, very very little, but it's still a little bit of atmosphere that kind of slow down the satellite that eventually, without intervention, it will eventually slow down enough to fall into the Earth's atmosphere and then fall back into Earth. And what happened when it does fall back when it has these nuclear material, right? So that's kind of the big concern. Even if you send things into other planets and other exoplanets like the moon, what if in the future we have colonization for these planets, and then right now we don't have it and we don't really care, and it's contaminate these type of environment, and then in the future it can cause problems for the inhabitants in the future, right? So that's also something to think about. So it kind of highlight the need for deorbiting plan and space kind of disclosure and I guess space gendering is what I would call it. So elephant in the room, like I said, is public perception and opposition to nuclear power. There's a lot of people who are absolutely anti-nuclear. They just absolutely have big fear in nuclear. They have big concerns, and there's no amount of talking to them that would kind of calm them down, right? They just have it from the media. It got into their core that they just don't like nuclear, and that's something to fear, and that's just something that we need to address as a society, right? So there has to be strategies to kind of address fear to the public. I think in the nuclear world, nuclear scientists, nuclear engineering, like we do a very very awful job of educating the public of the dangers and the truth of nuclear power, because nuclear is not as scary as a lot of people think. A lot of people are exposed more to radiation from background radiation, so from the sun, but also from the earth that they get. Even if they are older and they go a lot to the hospital, you're gonna get a lot of exposure to radiation. Like CT scan has a lot of radiation but most people don't really care about getting a CT scan, right? And they don't really think about the radiation involved about it. But if you make a nuclear power plant that's gonna expose them to very very little amount of radiation, they all up in arms because there's just a very very backward perception of what nuclear power is. Even if you take a plane to another location, like to another country, let's say, when you go up into the higher altitude, you're going to be exposed to more radiation than you are on the sea level. So that's just something people don't understand, and that's just something that us as nuclear physicists have done very awful job of educating the public. So let's go to collaboration and policy development. So that's the name of the title. I know it's cut off a little bit. So the need for international cooperation is very necessary. Global regulatory framework for space nuclear safety, and it needs to also encourage technology sharing agreements and among other space agencies as well for different international. Now we run into the same problem where different countries kind of want to beat each other. They want to be like the top dog, so they don't want to share things, right? Even though it would kind of benefit society. Every country has their own type of power, like that they want to have for themselves. So they don't really want to kind of sit down on the table and agree on something. And if someone were to break that agreement, what would happen, type of thing. So some solution is establishment of International Space Nuclear Safety Agency. So under UN oversight, right? But then you also run into the problem where UN is very very inefficient. Right, there's just a lot of talk, and a lot of people have different interests, and right, so we're going to that kind of problem, and there's a fierce debate when it comes to this. binding international treaties for launch safety and reactor disposal, right? So that's one of the solutions. But then who enforces it, right? And how would it be enforced? It's just that kind of like, and what would happen if someone were to break that treaty, right? Or so that's just something that's a really gray area, especially a very powerful country. Like a small country, it will be easy to enforce, but for a big powerhouse of a country like Russia, China, it gets really really muddy, right? Joint research, for radiation shielding and risk mitigation, right? So run into problems where people just every country has their own pride and they don't want to share things, but that's just one of the solution, and there's always obstacle to that solution. So work out